2003, Room on Fire came out, so what have the last couple of years been like for you?
Julian?
The last 3 years, I don't know, they've been, each year was different, so I don't know. The last one was very relaxing and productive musically. The one before that was pretty stressful. And then before that, I guess, I don't know. I don't remember.
For a long time, the Strokes had very little to worry about. It was in various boarding schools and bars that Julian Casablancas, Albert Hammond Jr., Nick Valensi, Fabrizio Moretti, and Nikolai Fraiture solidified their friendships and decided to pursue music together. Despite embarking on this journey in the most expensive and competitive city in the world, they had a bit of help paying the bills from some notable family members, and more than enough charm and vitality to convince the New York City snobs to ignore that last detail. But as their star ballooned further and further out of their control, an undeniable feeling of pressure started to build on top of them. First, from all the hype. The Strokes got their first bit of international attention from the British press, a loose confederacy of rags and tabloids united in their love of a simple story. The boys were soon labeled the saviors of rock, headlining festivals and touring the world before their first album was even released, leading many on the more skeptical side to question if the Strokes even had a good album in them. 2001's Is This It thankfully put that question to bed, but it soon raised many more. Sure, the debut sold pretty well, but not as well as some of these magazine covers would have you believe, and sure, it reviewed really well, but that's not saying much for a debut. Could this success be replicated? Could it be improved on? Could the Strokes ever really stand on their own 2 feet? Or would they peak before some of them could legally drink? 2003's Room on Fire would not be enough to satisfy all these worries. The reviews were fine. The sales were enough to stop using Dad's credit card, but the band was an ambitious lot. Good enough was never quite good enough, and with album 2 performing just slightly worse than album 1, there was a sense that they could have done better, a feeling not helped by what came after. The Room on Fire tour was us parodying ourselves. It was almost comical when I look back at it. We were really living off the fruits of our hard work and self-destructing. The Strokes were almost as famous for their party lifestyles as they were for their music. I mean, those magazines had to write about something before the first album, but even in the eyes of the best-intentioned fans, the two went hand in hand. The songs of Is This It were played in clubs as much as they were about clubs. But after so many years of late nights and hungover rehearsals, many of the Strokes saw the writing on the wall. Especially frontman Casablancas, who had already temporarily quit alcohol during the production of ROF, and was looking to make the change permanent after.
And I always told myself, if it starts negatively affecting music, that's when I'll stop. So it kind of was about to, and so I had to keep the promise I made to myself.
Everything was changing behind the scenes. While once the Strokes were viewed as a gang, sharing apartments and going almost everywhere together, that wasn't the case so much anymore. Julian got married, Fab and Albert got famous girlfriends, Nick and Nikolai even had kids, and as their perspectives and priorities started to shift more and more outside of the studio, it's no surprise that some of that slipped into the studio. Guitarist Nick Valensi explained that, at first, we had garnered, I suppose, too much acclaim, more than we deserved. We were praised as rock's savior when all we ever recorded was a half-hour record, so we felt rushed to get more stuff out there. So this time we didn't want to have the same fire on our asses. We wanted to take as much time as we needed. Nick is putting it mildly. As his bandmate would explain, Room on Fire was a mad dash all the way. 23-hour workdays and creative cut corners were just enough to get the album out in 2 months, but only just. With some of them already beginning to regret how the last album was handled, the decision was made to take things down a notch. The band built their own recording space in Hell's Kitchen, red carpet studios, an expensive upfront cost that meant they could come and go as they pleased without worrying about daily or hourly fees, allowing them to recapture the energy they found before fame, when they could workshop songs for months before putting them down on tape or playing them live. And I do mean months. Guitarist Albert Hammond would offhandedly tell an interviewer in 2004 that in order to change your sound drastically, you have to be in the studio for a year and a half. And, well, it seems the band took that to heart, working up until late 2005 on their third album, thus allowing for a real creative shakeup. Hammond's fellow son of a famous songwriter friend, Sean Lennon, recommended producer David Kahn, who helped completely change the energy of the album, not only by intimidating the young men with his experience and resume into just keeping things a bit more professional in the studio, but by pushing the songs in a more modern direction, with a cleaner sound that meshed well with an album that had more restrained and thoughtful moments than their famously frantic first few. The added time also encouraged them to open the project up for collaboration. The Strokes have always been equal partners, even having a clause in their contract stating that if one member quit, the whole band would be dissolved. But like in any social environment, someone always comes out on top. Frontman Julian Casablancas not only sang lead vocals, but also received full writing credits for every song on the first two Strokes albums. And while there was always room for everyone else to tweak things here and there, Album 3 was a whole different animal. I used to wait until everything was done and walk in with kind of a finished product. I used to do more on my own, and now I'd bring the songs in less finished and let them brew a little bit, let them simmer, and let the other guys think about them. When all was said and done, everyone got a writing credit somewhere, with what was soon dubbed First Impressions of Earth being primed for a late 2005 release date. Until a hiccup. What were your feelings after hearing the completed First Impressions for the first time? Finally, got the f***er finished, thank God. I think I felt like it was finished before it was actually finished, because we finished it. We finished tracking, and we mixed it, and then we ended up mastering it, and I thought we were really done. But it turned out some people weren't happy with it, and we ended up remastering it a couple of times. So I thought it was done before it was. So when it was finally done, I was like, about f***ing time. And at the time, that was about it. Despite the fact that First Impressions of Earth released on the most inconvenient possible set of dates, we'll just say 2006, to the worst reviews of the first three Strokes albums, and by far the worst sales, the band stayed very positive. Things are a little more comfortable. I think we've settled into our individual roles in the band, and also the band as a collective has settled into its place in modern music. When we first started out, things always felt really nervous and frenetic. There was always this really rushed attitude towards things. Like, we've got to do things really fast and we can't waste any time. That was there, along with all this nervous energy surrounding us all the time. That's gone, and it's been replaced by a really laid-back vibe. This forthrightness was a big benefit in the end. We developed every song little by little, so after the first songs we could see in which direction it develops. And we allowed things we would have never done on the first two records. Evolution is the key word. I'm really excited by this record. It sounds just like it should, and I'm proud we've shown we can keep getting better. That's pretty cool. So, is that it then? Even if, from an outsider's perspective, the album flopped, does that really matter if the band says they're happy with it? Well, normally, I'd say no. But considering what happened 5 years later, I'm not so sure anymore. Truth be told, the band's description of work on their third album back in the mid-2000s was so mild that I considered dropping it as a video subject entirely, content with the fact that I'd give it a brief nod before moving on to their next album. Until I started reading about that next album, and suddenly, everything got a little more complicated. On March 6, 2011, Pitchfork published This Is It, 10 Years of the Strokes, in anticipation of the 10-year anniversary of the band's smash hit debut, and the imminent release of the band's fourth album, Angles. In it, the Strokes were encouraged to open up in a way that they hadn't really done publicly beforehand, and when it came to their third album, well, they gave us quite a bit. Guitarist Nick Valensi describes the year spent recording as full of fits and starts, with all band members rarely in the same place at the same time. The famously optimistic and sunny drummer Fab Moretti would describe it being difficult to put on a smile every day. It was a get-the-job-done kind of thing. Bassist Nikolai Fraiture added that the certain thing that makes bands great, the communication, the focus, was starting to recede, while guitarist Albert Hammond put it the most concretely. Talk about not having fun, that's the understatement of the year. I was balls to the wall f***ed up, so it's hard for me to judge. What happened? Like really, what happened? These were a group of guys who were confident, telling interviewers things like, "This feels like a new beginning," and "all this nervous energy surrounding us all the time, that's gone, and it's been replaced by a real laid-back vibe." Then they return after 5 years of not releasing any music just to tell us that everything's gone to hell? I hate to sound repetitive, but what the hell happened? Well, let's take it from the top. It's 2004. The band are feeling refreshed after a nice break, and they're ready to make something new. But not everything is as rosy as it seems. While building their own studio did give them the time and freedom to experiment more and stress less, it may have loosened things a little too much. We'd write and arrange a song, call up the producer, and record it. Then he would leave for a couple of weeks, and we'd start working on another song and call him back when we were ready to record again. Well, the expectation was that this added time would bring back the gang mentality of their first album. Instead, it just gave them all the more excuses to spend time apart. Meanwhile, the time they did spend together wasn't as fruitful as they'd hoped. Sure, at the time, the band would report feeling the project was more collaborative than ever, but clearly it wasn't collaborative enough. Julian would vaguely complain in an interview that people in our camp are making me feel bad about doing it the way I want to do it. They want me to do cheesy things. I feel like I've given up a lot of my fantasies just in terms of how we do things. I just want to do things differently, and to a lot of people, that's annoying. Leading interviewer Jay McInerney to comment that the paradox of the Strokes is that they are a democracy under a dictator. No matter how much control Casablancas gives up, it always leaves him feeling powerless, while his bandmates only realize how little they can really do. Friend of the band JP Bowersock would later note that Room on Fire was, in his eyes, the beginning of the other guys starting to voice their opinions on the music as forcefully as Julian would voice his. Well, it wouldn't be until First Impressions of Earth that we would see the real fallout of that change. Not helping matters was, shockingly, Julian's sobriety. Again, while at the time this was reported on as a purely positive change, it wouldn't be until these newer interviews that some hard truths started to leak out. That while yes, obviously, it's a good thing for someone with an alcohol dependency to stop drinking alcohol, it has a negative impact on the friendships that were built on the back of alcohol. It's a delicate subject that I can't really blame the band for avoiding, but it was the Strokes' level-headed bassist that put it simplest. Around then, Julian started withdrawing. Maybe because he stopped drinking as well. A large part of our relationship was based on that, being at a bar and drinking. Casablancas quit alcohol with the best of intentions, but you can't predict the fallout of every decision. Case in point, hiring a new producer. I wouldn't blame you for letting that detail slide earlier in the video, since bands typically change producers about as often as they change socks. But the Strokes were always a little different. From the start, it was always publicly these 5 guys, but really, the Strokes were more of a big extended family. There was manager Ryan Gentles, guitar guru JP Bowersock, and producer Gordon Raphael. And just like how there was a clause in the contract saying that it's all the Strokes or none of them, the band respected the need to keep these guys as well. With Hammond explaining, "I would like all our records to be with Gordon and JP. I'd like to be on our 6th record with those guys and say, look where we took this family. With that alone, we could survive our whole career." Hell, the band's bassist went as far as to say that firing any of the previously mentioned collaborators would be like Mike Tyson going to Don King. These quotes are from 2004, and not long after, they'd be heading into the studio with a different producer. So how does one balance this with that? Well, quite literally, as it turns out. The Strokes approached longtime producer Gordon Raphael with an offer to work on the album with David Kahn, double producing it. Again, not an uncommon strategy in the industry that is usually achieved through a pre-existing relationship between both producers, not, complete strangers being mashed together like action figures. I said, "Julian, I don't really like this scene. I want to go." And he said, "Please stay." "Why? I'm not doing anything." "Well, because if you leave, we're going to have to fire David Kahn because we don't know how to talk to him. But we think he's onto something with our sound, and we need you to stay in case we need you to explain what we mean." Of course, the job of a producer is pretty loose, essentially doing whatever the artist needs them to do. But working as a middleman between them and another producer who they can't communicate with? I don't know, it just feels like there's a more obvious solution here. Still, at the end of the day, Gordon was the one who ended up getting fired. with the end product of the album and his time spent with the band giving him a pretty good idea as to why he received the cold shoulder. I believe they saw the bands that came in the door behind the first record that were selling 3 times more than them, and were wondering if it was a production thing. At the time, they were getting married and having children, and wondering how they could go higher than they did. Of course, this is just one theory, by someone who has a motive for painting the Strokes out to be sellouts, but I think there's a bit more nuance here. For one thing, the Strokes did inspire a huge trend in the rock world. 2, actually. The post-punk and garage rock revivals, where similar bands, either in sound, appearance, or geography, were given the spotlight simply for their proximity to a band with a massive spotlight on them. Some of these bands, like the White Stripes and the Killers, went on to achieve a level of success that the Strokes could hardly compare to. And while at the time, the boys kept up their typical "we don't care about sales" shtick, in more recent years, they shone some light on how that jealousy crept into the band. We had conversations that went along the lines of, "Gosh, I think our songs are better than Mr. Brightside by the Killers, but how come that's the one that everyone is listening to?" Friends, girlfriends, strangers would all start coming in being like, "You should be a bigger band," and I was like, "Yeah, we should be a bigger band." For as strong as we were, and as close as we weren't close or strong enough to fight that. It's also true that their lives were changing. The band was growing up and apart. Maybe they thought this was their last chance. Maybe they wanted to take that one last big swing before it was too late, before they outgrew the Strokes. A common thread I heard in multiple interviews was a desire to legitimize the band, or cement their position in the music world. It would explain the change in producer, the added time taken to change their sound, and the clear desire to have a hit album. It's obvious the Strokes had high hopes for First Impressions of Earth. But when it ultimately failed to match the sales or the ratings of their immature debut or rushed sophomore album, the band didn't seem to mind. They abruptly and quickly told interviewers that selling millions of records is not a concern of ours, and "I don't care what anyone thinks." But the Strokes do care. They've said it themselves countless times. Of course, artists lying to the press is nothing new, but I think it's that question of why they lied that I find so interesting. Why act like this album solved all their problems when behind the scenes, it was their collective least favorite to work on? The easy answer is that they wanted to avoid all the drama and public scrutiny, which is definitely a factor. But I feel like the truth is that they were lying to more than just us. Like if you read these interviews, the specific things they say, it's like they want it to be true. They want this to be their comeback, and for everything afterwards to just be creativity and collaboration all the time, when in reality, they were trying to block a flood with their guitars. I remember reading a review of First Impressions of Earth and Spin, and they mentioned in their review that it sounded like the last Strokes album. At the time, I took offense, but in hindsight, they were so close to the truth. I'm not even sure we're going to make a 4th album at this point. Hey, did you know you could have seen this video a whole week ago? Well, not exactly. I needed an extra day or two to tweak some stuff, but you could have seen it 5 days ago. Thanks to YouTube's algorithm, what day I upload can make or break a video's success, meaning you don't see a totally finished product until an arbitrary date and time. Until now. Nebula is an independent creator-owned streaming service that encourages me and countless others to tell our stories our way, all without any ads or sponsors getting in the way. Along with the platform's huge catalog of original and exclusive content, cough cough, Matt Sharpie, Weezer, it's a whole video I made that you can only watch on Nebula, cough cough. The service also provides a variety of classes and early uploads. So not only could you have watched this video before anyone else, you could have seen Nebula first from Polyphonic, Mary Spender, Todd in the Shadows, and a bunch of incredible creators who don't focus on music, like some of my personal favorites, Joe Scott and Extra History. So if you want to support my channel, enjoy the exclusive Matt Sharp v Weezer, watch some future videos early, and binge the work of countless talented creators, then go to nebula.tv/markbutevil to get 40% off, because with my code, Nebula is just $36 a year. And for those of you looking to share the love, Nebula has got you covered with new annual gift cards. Use the link gift.nebula.tv/markbutevil to give a year of Nebula to a friend, or just nebula.tv/markbutevil to get a year for yourself for just $36, $3 a month. Hey, if you like the video, like the video. If you like me, subscribe. I have more videos, so you should watch those videos, thank you. Special thanks to these illuminating sources and to you for watching till the end. Leave a comment to let me know if you want more behind the Strokes. I'm gonna leave now. Goodbye.